So Dark Souls 3 has been out for, I want to say, a little more than a few weeks now. About a month in Japan and a few weeks here in the States. I'm absolutely loving it. I went on a little trip through Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2, being the little pleb that I am in not having finished those games. For record's sake, before I went on this marathon of playing all the games, in Dark Souls 1, I had made it to Sen's Fortress before putting the game down and being distracted by other things, and I just never went back to it. But now, again, with Dark Souls 3, I dedicated myself to beating 1, and I did it. I did everything there was to do, and then I went on to Dark Souls 2, did everything there, averaging about 160 deaths and about 200 some in 2. And now I'm playing 3, and I'm having a blast still. They're the same basic formula throughout. And the real reason I wanted to do this video was to go on a little ramble on how Dark Souls is, while challenging, one of the most approachable series I think I've ever played. A lot of games nowadays are so heavily focused on tutorials. And this was not a thing back in the day. And mostly it was to the detriment of games that would simply go and teach and tell you, hey, you do not have a tutorial because we didn't have enough space on the game to do a tutorial. Oh my god, you go forward and you fight the enemies and then they kill you. And you go back to the beginning and you do it again. And you get good from a determination of having to go through it. But nowadays that approach doesn't work all too well. Without the gameplay, the mechanics to back it up. Why? Because we have so many other games we can go to. Back then, on the NES, for the SNES to some extent, even the N64, the library of games wasn't as large. And a lot of the developers nowadays didn't exactly exist or had their full potential unlocked yet. Game design wasn't the pinnacle that it is now. And we have a lot of problems now that have stemmed from this generation of gaming, including microtransactions, which work in some cases, but most times often not. And I'm like, you know, game mechanics are awesome when they teach you how to play the game. But back on topic here, with games nowadays, sometimes tutorials can take an hour or two. Where that's a hyperbole, of course, about 30 minutes to 40 minutes, some of the bigger cases, and on average, the longer tutorials are about there, where it's like a level that's really slow-paced, and it's like, here's a wall, or sometimes even it's here's a wall of text, perform an action, here's another wall of text, and it's just, it's not the same. It's benefited, of course, because you'll be prepared to the game, but nothing is more satisfying than Dark Souls and its tutorials. One of the games I could point back to is Jump and Shoot Man, or Mega Man if I have to go into it, because those games taught you through level design how their concepts were going to work. It showed you a concept in an easy form, and then showed you a concept where it would kill you, and then just threw it at you over and over again, and you were expected to succeed. In Dark Souls, it's the exact same thing. Starts you off, shows you the basic controls, lets you get used to it in a small playground, then it throws a little enemy at you, and you're like, okay, I can do this, I know the basics. Then it kind of shows you a different mechanic with little etchings on the ground that are just a tiny little bit of text that you go, press this button to do this, and you press the button, nothing happens. You try it on an enemy that makes it pretty easy, and then they start throwing you bigger guys at you. And you realize that you're going to need to use these skills to your full potential. You can make a few mistakes here and there, and you're like, okay, it's going to be difficult. But you can push through. And and the game doesn't really rack up in difficulty immediately. A lot of people look at Dark Souls and immediately think, this game is really difficult. This game is so impossible. How do people play it? And then there's the community that does play Dark Souls that go, how are you stuck on that? But keep in mind, not everyone has the same playing ability. However, regardless of what one side says or the other side says, I'm going to stick directly in the middle and go and say Dark Souls is one of the most approachable games you'll ever play. Because No matter its difficulty, no matter its challenge, the game's 99% of the time is fair. There's always a way to do something better when you get hit. There's always something else to learn. And it's gonna throw curveballs at you. What wouldn't? Life throws curveballs at you. And you're gonna have to respond, you're gonna have to learn, and you're gonna die quite a few times because you need to learn it. But if you're willing to stick through, if you're willing to keep going, Dark Souls is one of the most enjoyable and rewarding experiences. Just don't be a completionist and beat the entire series unless you really want to, because there's nothing for it. But going through the games, beating them once, is a blast. And they're really replayable too. You'll get your money's worth out of these games. If you can, the best thing you can do is maybe borrow it from a friend. I don't mean play it with a friend, I mean borrow it with a friend. And why I say that comes down to, with a friend, you're going to get either some laughs, or some criticisms, or some go here, do that, especially if they played it. I think they're games that should be played without knowing a thing what you're doing. If you prefer to know what you're doing and going into that and reading guides all the way through, be my guest. That's how you play. I'm an adventurer. I'm an explorer. I want to go through point A, and I want to be slaughtered for my wrong choice. And then I want to go, well, can I do it? Get slaughtered a few more times, and then I'll go the other way. I love the sense of adventure and thrill, and that's what Dark Souls does best, along with its boss fights and its mechanics. It's a great learning experience and a great experience overall. I absolutely love this series, and I urge anyone to give it a shot. Bloodborne is also a game you can get if you have a PS4. In terms of the games, I would suggest going in order of release for the Dark Souls games. I would not suggest starting with Demon Souls, even though that was the first game, because that one's incredibly punishing. And really, but Dark Souls 1, I think, gets it right. Dark Souls 2, a little bit on the disappointing side, if only for the fact that its boss fights are incredibly easy, while its areas seem overtuned and a little easier to kill you a bunch because of just a lot more enemies and a lot more overwhelming encounters. The DLC is fantastic pretty much all the way through, but you're not going to get to that till you get real near the end of the game. And Dark Souls 3, while I'm not done with it, so far has been very much akin to Dark Souls 1. And it holds your hand just as much as it needs to, but when it lets you loose and lets you explore, it's a wondrous experience. Get these games if you can. From Software does an amazing job at making these games. And I'm Javier Kinetic Reunion. I hope to see you all in the next video. Ciao.